Welcome to Talk Fights. I'm Curtis Biggs. Today I'd like to talk about another one of my favorite fighters, the great Joe Louis. What an awesome fighter. Awesome champion. Born Joseph Louis Barrow on May 13th, 1914. Had about 50 amateur fights with only 3 losses, depending on what sources you look at. Turned pro at 20 years old on the 4th of July, 1934, against Jack Kraken. Kraken had 28 wins with 7 losses and 3 draws, including 24 KOs. That is a huge gap in experience and a stern test for your debut. Louis showed that he was for real when he knocked Kraken out in the first round. For his 4th bout, he fought 14-0 Jack Krantz, winning a unanimous decision. In his 15th bout, he fought 40-9 Lee Ramage, knocking him out in the 2nd round. A year later, he fought Ramage again knocking him out in the 2nd round with a nasty left hook. His first real test was in former heavyweight champion 6'5" Primo Carnera, who had 65 knockouts and 82 wins, and only 7 losses. After knocking Carnera down 3 times, the referee mercifully put a stop to the fight in the 6th round. He knocked out King Levinsky in the 1st round, fought former heavyweight champion Max Baer, who had 30 knockouts and 40 wins. After breaking him down with hard jabs and vicious combos, he knocked him out in the 4th round. On June 19th, 1936, he fought Max Schmeling. Now Louis was 19-0 at the time and a 10-1 favorite to beat Schmeling. Schmeling was 48-7-4, but had been 4-1-3 in his last 8 fights, and was also 31 years old. It looked like an easy fight for Joe Louis. Now Max Schmeling was no joke. He was a former heavyweight champion, a crafty veteran, and a strong counterpuncher with a crushing right hand. While attending one of Louis's fights shortly before theirs, the story goes that Schmeling said, "I see something." Those are the exact words that he used when speaking to American reporters before their fight. Now the fight started, and Schmeling let Louis get off some combinations to give him the confidence to open up. What Schmeling had seen was that while punching, Joe would often lean his head to the right, and many times bring his left hand back low, and Schmeling was waiting with that counter right. After knocking him down hard in the 4th round, he continued to take control of the bout, battering Louis on his way to a 12th round KO with an uppercut and another brutal right hand. It was a huge upset. After the loss, Louis reeled off 7 more wins, including a 3rd round knockout of former heavyweight champion Jack Sharkey. He then gained himself a title shot against the Cinderella Man Jim Braddock. Louis was knocked down in the 1st round, but came back to knock Braddock out in the 8th, becoming only the 2nd ever black heavyweight champion, since Jack Johnson had lost his title 22 years before that. 3 more wins and 1 year to the day set up the epic rematch between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling at Yankee Stadium in New York. Now, epic really doesn't describe the significance and anticipation of this bout. There's never been a sporting event that meant as much as this fight. It took place on June 22nd, 1938. World War II didn't officially start until September 1st, 1939, but the wheels had been turning in Europe and Asia for quite a few years, with most people knowing that war was right around the corner. The 2 main actors being Germany and the United States, each having one of the 2 best fighters in the world. That this fight even happened is so unbelievable and so awesome. You have the 2 most powerful nations in the world on on the doorstep of a global conflict for world supremacy, and their two greatest warriors are going to fight each other. That's like Alexander the Great fighting Genghis Khan. I recognize that Alexander and Genghis lived in different time periods, but that's almost what it must have been like. I don't think we can even really know how much this fight meant psychologically to each nation going into the war. I know that most of the battles in World War II weren't fistfights, but for one nation to be able to say that the best fighter in the world, the baddest man on the planet, is one of ours, would be huge. Everyone who could be there was there. Everyone who could listen on the radio was listening. So with unprecedented international interest and consequence, the fight starts. And Lewis absolutely destroys Schmeling. He gets right on him, hitting him with hard rights and uppercuts and hooks. Puts him on the ropes and cranks him in the solar plex with the left hand that freezes Schmeling in his tracks. Lewis starts unloading heavy rights and lefts. You see him hit Lewis low in the back with the right hand. That shot broke 2 vertebrae in Schmeling's spine. After the fight, he spent 2 weeks in an American hospital before he was able to travel, then spent 4 weeks in a German hospital. In an interview shortly before his death, Schmeling said that when the weather was bad, he could still feel that spot on his back. The referee breaks them apart, and Lewis comes back in with a hellacious jab cross, putting Schmeling down. Schmeling's up too quickly and put down quickly with a left hook. Body shot, left hook, right hand, and he's down again. You see a towel come in from Max's corner, and the referee picks it up and throws it out of the ring where it hangs on the ropes. Back then, and in New York, the referee did not have to accept the towel. This is a rule that I usually don't agree with, and I'm happy that it no longer exists. But in that context, with those players at that level, with everything surrounding the fight, I appreciate the referee's decision to say no. Your corner's not quitting for you, you're getting knocked out. As it happened, Schmeling's corner jumped in the ring and put a stop to it anyway, but that's a technicality. It was the beatdown of all beatdowns. For Lewis, someone who experienced racism and prejudice at home at a level that many of us probably couldn't even understand, was now almost uniformly loved in his own country. Even going into this bout, he would have had nearly 100% support at home. Schmeling too would have had as close as you can get to total support. I'd be willing to bet it all there wasn't a single person in Germany that night cheering for Lewis. Not publicly, anyway. I mean, can you imagine being at a pub in Munich? Everybody's crowded around the radio listening to the play-by-play. In the final moments of that fight, some guy's jumping up and down. Finish him, Joe! Finish him! I hope nobody was that stupid. So after the fight, Joe Louis is basically the greatest guy in the world. As for Max Schmeling, who knows what was going through his head. He was probably in fear for his life, in fear for the lives of his family. Now, they didn't execute Max Schmeling, but they did throw him into the military, where he saw combat as a paratrooper for the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. At the Battle of Crete in 1941, he was injured to the point of being considered unfit for duty. Now, Schmeling, to be fair to him, was not a Nazi from everything that I've read and from what Schmeling himself has said. He just happened to be German. He had a lot of family that lived in Germany, including a wife and kids, who were forced to travel separately from him when attending his fights abroad, out of fear of them all defecting. You can't blame him for not walking up to Hitler and saying, "Listen, man, I just can't get behind some of these policies." He was an intelligent guy, intelligent enough to know when to keep his mouth shut, when to smile and nod, and to hail when everyone else did. Supposedly saved the lives of 2 Jewish children by hiding them in his apartment during the purge of the Jews in Berlin. In 1992, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Ring Magazine has him ranked number 55 on their list of all-time punchers. He died wealthy in 2005 at the age of 99. Good for him. So 6 months after fighting Max Schmeling, Lewis comes back and fights former light heavyweight champion John Henry Lewis, who had only 10 losses in 115 fights and had never been stopped. Lewis knocked him out in the first round. This started a period some people refer to as the Bum of the Month Club. Now, Joe did fight one guy named Johnny Davis, who had 3 wins and 3 losses. It's a bit silly for someone with that record to be fighting the world heavyweight champion. Not surprisingly, Lewis knocked him out in the first round. But the rest of the guys were all tough, top 10 contenders, or had been. He fought Tony Galento, who was 76, 23, and 5, with 53 KOs. Galento didn't have the body of your average fighter, but was a very rough and tough guy. He fought for the heavyweight championship twice, against Joe Louis and against Max Baer. Lewis knocked Galento down in the first round, but in the third round, Galento was able to knock Lewis down. Lewis came back in the fourth round and put a stop to Tony Galento's onslaught. Those 2 knockdowns were the first in Galento's career, spanning over 100 fights. He fought a guy with the unfortunate name of Johnny Paycheck, who did actually have a record of 44 wins with only 4 losses and 2 draws, including 28 KOs. Despite the record, he was no match for Lewis. I imagine the running joke was something along the lines of, he's really earning his money tonight. After being dropped with a barrage of punches in the first round, I could just see his family and friends in the crowd saying, stay down, Johnny. There's easier ways to make money. But he gets back up. Lewis puts him down again before the end of the round for good measure. Paycheck, to his credit, gets up again. Goes back to his corner and gets himself together, coming out for the second round, only to eat a right hand that puts his lights out. Poor Johnny Paycheck. The saddest part is that his fight purse was probably less than what it would have cost to put his jaw back together. Joe had a rematch with Bob Pastor, who he knocked out in the 11th round with a right hand. These were all tough guys, and Lewis went right through them. After his retirement, he did an interview with Muhammad Ali, where Ali was ribbing him a bit, saying, "You used to have that Bum of the Month tour. What if I'd been around back then?" And Lewis said, "You'd have been on the tour." Muhammad Ali is basically the greatest talker ever. They didn't call him the Louisville Lip for nothing. It's rare to see anybody get the better of him in a conversation, but I think Joe burned him pretty good on that one. In 1941, he was matched up with light heavyweight champion Billy Conn. For a smaller guy to step up and try to take the bigger guy's title is a little bit of an insult in and of itself. Conn was also very cocky in interviews leading up to the fight. When the bout started, spectators, and certainly Conn and Lewis, could see that Conn was a little bit faster and maybe a little bit sharper than Joe. He gave him a very tough fight, really getting the better of him. Up until the 13th round, when his cockiness got the best of him, and decided to go toe-to-toe with Joe. Bad idea. After a few heated exchanges, Joe hits him with an uppercut, left hook, right hand, and down he goes. My favorite part about that fight is Joe's reaction to the knockout, which is none. Turned around and walked away like it was nothing. 40 plus years later, Mike Tyson adopted a similar routine. He would knock a guy into tomorrow and walk away like it was nothing. Now, I have no problem with fighters getting fired up or celebrating after a big win, especially a knockout. Must be very exciting to knock out your opponent in front of thousands of screaming fans. But I respect the ones that are able to suppress it when they want to. Great boxing trainer Teddy Atlas said that one of the hallmarks of a good pro is being able to separate themselves from the emotion. And I would agree with that. Lewis met Conn again in 1946, this time able to finish him in the 8th round with a brutal uppercut left hook. During World War II, Joe did get involved with the armed forces, enlisted in the armed forces. He fought 96 exhibition matches for the troops at various army bases. During his time in the military, he rose to the rank of technical sergeant and was awarded the Legion of Merit. In 1942, he knocked out Buddy Bear, Max Bear's brother, in the first round. He was paid $47,000, all of which he donated to the Navy Relief Fund. Also in 1942, he stopped Abe Simon in the 6th round, being paid $36,000, all of which he donated to the Army Relief Fund. In 1947, Jersey Joe Walcott challenged him for his heavyweight title. Walcott was a hard puncher with a tricky, unusual style, later dubbed the Walcott Shuffle, where he would change his lead foot from left to right and often feint with his shoulders. He gave Joe a very tough 15-round bout, at the end of which Joe tried to get out of the ring immediately, knowing that he had lost, but his handlers pushed him back in to hear the decision, where he was awarded a split decision win. Most people, including myself, including Joe Louis, feel like he clearly lost the fight. Just look at Walcott's corner. They cannot believe that he lost. 6 months later, he fought Walcott again, with the fight unfolding much the same way, until the 11th round, where Joe rocked him with a right hand and got right on top of him, finishing with a powerful combo. That's one of the most exciting things about Joe Louis is his power. He was a very skilled boxer with a straight up and down, very textbook style, but had dynamite in both hands. Did he hit quite as hard as Mike Tyson or George Foreman? Probably not, but he was twice the combination puncher of both those guys. Where Tyson would hit you once or twice, Louis would hit you 6 times before your body had a chance to fall. 6 is good. After the fight against Walcott, Louis retired undefeated as champion. His only loss to Max Schmeling years before. Had a record of 25 title defenses over 11 years, which does make him the most successful champion of all time across all weight classes. Now, Julio Cesar Chavez of Mexico and Omar Andre Narvaez of Argentina do each have 27 title defenses, but those are across multiple weight divisions. Joe's 25 is still the record for consecutive title defenses within a single weight class. In 1950, he returned to the ring, presumably because he needed money, to challenge Ezzard Charles for his then heavyweight championship, losing a unanimous 15-round decision. Over the next year, he fought 8 more times, including a 6-round stoppage of the experienced Lee Savold, who had 152 fights with 72 knockouts to his credit. His 9th fight, in less than a year after losing to Ezzard Charles, he took on the undefeated powerhouse Rocky Marciano, the Brockton blockbuster. A 37-year-old Louis was just no match for a prime Marciano. Marciano knocked him down in the 8th round, on his way to knocking him right out of the ring, knocking him out, also in the 8th round. Years later, Bernard Hopkins, in his last fight, was also knocked out of the ring by Joe Smith, also in the 8th round. Joe finished his record with 66 wins to only 3 losses and 52 knockouts, according to BoxRec. Another fighter with a similar record who had idolized Joe was Muhammad Ali, who has 56 wins and 5 losses with 37 knockouts. Now, while the numbers of the records are very similar, what's more similar is that they both fought during a time when boxing was big, around the world, and heavyweight was a deep, talent-rich division. And they both fought everyone who was anyone, beating nearly all of them. Lewis's conduct in and out of the ring during his career was exemplary. He was a real gentleman. Unfortunately, he was coached on how to act by his handlers, even so far as to be given a written list of things not to do, such as not to be seen or photographed with white women, not to be seen going into bars alone, not to be cocky or boastful, not to celebrate over fallen opponents, especially white opponents. I think this left us seeing a slightly more reserved version of Joe Louis, but not an entirely different person. If it was all an act, the guy deserves an Oscar. To stay in character and hold that poker face for almost 20 years would be nearly impossible. I think the Joe Louis we saw in the public eye was very much like what he was, which is a quiet, thoughtful, respectful, and humble champion. One of the books in my collection is a biography of Joe Louis by Barney Nagler, aptly titled Brown Bomber, the Joe Louis Story. Excuse me, not the Joe Louis Story, the Pilgrimage of Joe Louis, pardon me. I have read it. It does chronicle his fights somewhat, but it talks more about his life outside the ring and his life after boxing, which is marked by severe tax troubles, problems with women, drugs and alcohol, a severe cocaine addiction, and declining mental health. When Joe was a young child, his father was labeled insane, as they called it at the time, and committed to an asylum for the remainder of his life. Late in his life, Joe Louis was headed down the same path, it seemed like. His mental health was declining very, very quickly. He was experiencing severe bouts of paranoia. He was hiding from family, hiding himself in hotel rooms, doing things like spreading mayonnaise on wall cracks to avoid being heard by tape recorders. Had fears of plots on his life. At one point he was committed to the hospital for 5 months due to his family's fears of his worsening conditions. Afterwards he suffered several strokes, and after heart surgery in 1977 he was confined to a wheelchair. Now, were these problems with his mental health a result of some level of pugilistic dementia, or a result of the drug and alcohol use, or a genetic predisposition of mental illness, or a combination of all those things? Who knows? For his last night in the town, he sat ringside when Trevor Berbick challenged Larry Holmes for his heavyweight championship, with Holmes winning a unanimous 15-round decision. An interesting side note is that Larry Holmes was number 2 on the heavyweight title defenses list, behind Joe Louis for many years, up until about 10 years ago when that spot was taken by Vladimir Klitschko. Joe Louis passed away the next morning on April 12th, 1981. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery by special request of American President Ronald Reagan with full military honors. Max Schmeling helped pay for his funeral and was also one of his pallbearers. Jimmy Cannon, a sports writer of the early 20th century, after the second bout with Schmeling, expressed it very well in his now famous comment, "Joe Louis is a credit to his race, the human race." See you at the fights.